Founders, welcome back to the 0 to 5,000 podcast, where we obsess over the convergence of human potential and business results. Today, our hosts Drew McClure and Jordan Mitchell have another insightful conversation for you. So let's jump right in.
Okay, founders, welcome back to the podcast. Today, I'm joined by Josh Watts. Josh is the co-founder of MedTrust Holdings, founded in 2012. MedTrust is the largest South Carolina-based private ambulance and mobile healthcare provider with more than 500 employees and 14 base locations throughout South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Josh's focus areas are strategic growth and legislative initiatives, workforce development, and organizational culture. And today, to tell us about his story, is Josh himself. So Josh, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Okay, very interesting business that I've not ever heard of. And so
Right.
I've got to imagine it came from an interesting starting point. So what birthed this company? Take me back to the beginning.
So background has nothing to do with ambulances or EMS or anything like that, although admittedly I did have some healthcare background. But really what drove the idea was licking my wounds coming out of the real estate mess of 2008, 9, and 10. And had spent about 9 years in real estate and development, and it crashed and burned for a period of time. And I had was approached by two brothers that I had gone to high school with, who were also not familiar with EMS, and asked me to help them write a business plan and raise money to start a private ambulance company. And I remember when they said it, I was like you. I had no idea that private ambulances were a thing. I didn't know that existed. And I said, well, what do you know about ambulances? And they said nothing, but we have seen some really poor examples of professionalism and poor examples of how people are being treated. And I'm super passionate just about people in general. And so I agreed to spend about 6 months with them learning about the business and kind of mocking up a business plan and then raising some seed capital. And truthfully, during that period of time, I was baffled. I was thrown off by how people that had this enormous responsibility of, somebody's grandmother or father or sister or brother weren't always either properly equipped, or they were didn't look professional, or maybe didn't even look like the business was a passion for them. And so we got them started in 2010, late 2010, and immediately I was interested in if the same dysfunction existed in my geography.
Yeah.
Because they were about 2.5 hours away. I was in Charleston, and unfortunately what I found, or fortunately, depending on who you ask, was it was the same story. It was the same story. In fact, it was the same companies, that you would see. And so, I went to one of my real estate investment clients and pitched the idea to him as kind of a backer. And we were kind of off. We were all front end doing our planning, looking for equipment and ambulances and all those things to purchase used stuff. And about a month before we were set to open the doors, if you will, which would have been January of 2012, he had to pull out. And so that was the first interesting point, because I was coming out of real estate. I didn't have a lot of extra funds to invest in the opportunity. And I had teamed up with my best friend's father as my business partner, and he was equally unable to invest. Both of us kind of hit by the same thing in the macroeconomic world at the same time. And so we had to bootstrap it and shoestring it, and, friends and family raise about half what we were planning to have to start with. And ultimately, we were so far down the path, we just decided to push forward and ended up licensing MedTrust the first entity, first operating entity in April of 2012 and did our first transport in May of 2012. And when we first started, the least clinical part of the business is where we focused, just not having that clinical background as a paramedic or an EMT or something like that. So we started off primarily serving nursing homes and dialysis clinics and doing doctor's appointment transports, things like that. And our focus, though, was really how we treated our people, how we treated the people that had a choice of who to call, so the customer, and then ultimately how we were accountable. If we told somebody we were going to be somewhere at 9 a.m., we took that very seriously, and that was a complaint of some of our competitors or peers or whatever. But on the flip side of that, everything doesn't always work out right. So if you're not on time, being accountable and using data to understand what happened and why. And so really from 2012 to 2013, that was picking up some steam.
Can I ask a quick question?
Please do. Yeah.
Who is the customer, at least at that point? Who is the customer?
Yeah. We had multiple customers, but the ones that generally made the choice and ordered the transport was a nursing home or another kind of post-acute facility. That changed over time, but initial days, that's what it was. And we were doing about 300 to 400 transports a month as we were kind of rounding the 12-month mark, the 1-year anniversary. And it was at that time that some of those customers were saying, hey, you guys are really good. We'd like to use you for more things. Could you add the paramedic level, or ALS, as they call it, advanced life support? So that was our plan. And we spent, 4 to 5 months purchasing some different equipment and hiring a few paramedics. And we're all excited about 2014. That was where we were going. We were, adding this complexity. And January the 1st of 2014, my co-founder was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And, we were really small. We were a small company at the time and very flat organizationally. So I was kind of the front of the house and he was the back of the house. And so immediately I was unable to be out, in the world growing the business. I had to be in the office and making sure that, payroll and the light bill and all of those things were happening. So it was really the first test, was MedTrust going to make it or not? And as we got about 6 months into his illness, unfortunately, it became obvious that that he wasn't going to beat it. And so at that point, I was faced with the reality of I don't want to, or I can't do this on my own, and also needed some investment. And so I, through a network, was connected with a very active angel investor here in town. And she had a very happy series of exits and was at a place where she would only really have to work, or would only choose to work if it was something that mattered. And so when we met, she was intrigued with the story, and ultimately we're people taking care of people. So it's got a lot of heart connection for anybody, if you really think about what the job is. And so she joined the company initially as an advisor and as a small investor. And 2 months later, Buddy died. My partner died. And so at that point, Lena was faced with, do I double down and go all in and jump in the boat, with Josh, or cut my losses, right? And thankfully, she joined full time in early 15, and she was chief administrative officer initially, and I was CEO. And when she did that, I'd say it was the first time we had asked ourselves a question that we probably should have asked a lot earlier, which is, what do we actually want to be when we grow up? And that question forced us to kind of bifurcate the industry and understand that most of our competitors were challenged because they were trying to be everything to everybody. And as a result, not really being great at any one particular customer. And so as part of that process, we decided to move away from the parts of the business that are most like a commodity and move towards the part of the business that is maybe more complex, takes more business acumen, more capital, more, all of those things. And so we made this grand decision, and that was to really target health system partnerships and hospitals. They actually really cared about quality. They cared about accountability and data and all those things that we were really good at. But at the same time, we weren't actually serving any yet. So it was very, shoot your shot type moment. And it took about a year of business development, building relationship. But then I'd say 2017 was kind of the inflection point. And we had just finished a strategic plan for 17 to 19. And we said, we're going to be in 3 states and, 15 million in revenue and serving 5 hospitals and, all these, what do they call them? BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. And at the time we had exactly 8 older ambulances and 35 employees. And in the same week of January in 2017, we were the dog that caught the bumper. So we won 2 hospital contracts in the same week. And whoa, yes. And so they were, yeah. So, you never fish with one line in the water, multiple lines in the water, and had 2 on. And they were both larger hospitals. I think just the way we communicated with them, we listened.
Yeah.
Lena or I, neither came from the industry. So we've always been cognizant of that and learning from who we're working with, even today, 10 years later, or 7 years later. So we were very conscious of what we call coming alongside our client and understanding specifically what they were trying to solve for, because it definitely was not what you might have thought it was. There's other initiatives. There's executive bonus things that they're focused on that maybe don't come front of mind. And so we spent a lot of time building relationship, and we built relationship from the caller level all the way, obviously, up, to the pin holder, if you will, or the C-suite. And I think that was very, very different from how those people had been engaged with before. What they told us was, kind of being used to being engaged with at an operational level only, very tactical. And we were talking about, what are you doing, not just today, but where are you going? Where are you going? How do we support that? And so, so these 2 hospitals that are both pretty good size said yes. And, we immediately had to raise capital and, go through an equity raise and buy a bunch of very expensive equipment and trucks. And essentially at the end of 2017, we had gone from 40 people in April to 40 ambulances in December. So we had 40 ambulances and 250 employees. So all of that happened in like 7.5 months, which is really exciting, but it's messy as can be, to grow that fast.
Were both of those your first hospital contracts?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. Yeah, that had to be interesting. Probably fell a few times and bumped his knees. So
how long was it from the time you secured the contract to you had to start delivering on it?
About 3.5 months.
Wow. So there's a rush there to even get the equipment and capability to fulfill the contract, right?
Truthfully, today you probably couldn't even do it with the supply chain challenges and getting ambulance chassis and all of that stuff. I'm guessing it maybe could be done, but it would be very, very difficult to do. You'd have to buy, demo units and all kinds of things like that just to piece things together. So yeah, it was a very short period of time. And then we launched the first contract, which effectively doubled the business, actually tripled the business. It was 2x our size at the time.
Mm.
So we started that contract in April of 17. And then in July, we started the second one. So as soon as we launched the first one, we were into project management or Gantt chart for the second one. And then later in that year, added one small hospital that was affiliated with the first client, and then added another very large system. So we went from 0 to 4 health systems, which was essentially our
Wow.
3-year strategic plan, in 7 months.
Yeah, it's like when you see a kid in 8th grade who's 5'5", and then in 9th grade he's 6'10", and you're like,
Correct.
You also went from having just to Uber grandma to her appointment
Correct.
to being front of line healthcare, potentially saving a life and handling an emergency situation. That feels stressful as well, right?
Well, it is. And, it's a different kind of stress. I don't talk down or think less of any part of the EMS business. It's just very different. The doctor's offices and doctor's appointments and all those things, that's critical. It's what keeps people, from being in an emergent situation. So I've never been the one to say, oh, it's just transport. And some people are like that. Oh, it's just transport. It's Uber with, somebody in the back. But yeah, once we focused on hospitals, it changed our patient, acuity. So our patients were in some cases much sicker. We're sometimes transporting patients on multiple IV drips and cardiac monitors and ventilators and all of those things, which again is exciting because the work you're doing is really impactful, but also an enormous sense of responsibility, not just for the patients and their family, but for the providers that are doing that work and the toll that takes, on them. And how do you support that? And how do you support it when it's not all under one roof? It's in now 4 different office or base locations. So, we learned an awful lot, and our message and our methodology was picking up steam. And at that point it said, okay, well, our 3-year plan is 3 states. We're in one right now. In fact, if you looked at a map, we call it the string of pearls. It was basically coastal South Carolina. And we said, okay, so how do we even have a conversation or think about another state? Why? Like what would be the thesis, I guess? And what happened, my favorite thing, and I won't even say to do, but it's what I'm kind of known for, is connection and relationship. And so one of our clients had a piece of their administrative side of their business, one hospital did, down in Jacksonville, Florida. And so we started building relationships in Jacksonville. And in December of 2018, I guess December of 2017, we found out about it. Jacksonville, that had been a very closed market, went through a public RFP process, and it had a 15-day window to respond. It was really crazy. It was by design, I think, on their side. But long story short, it was not a free market. So MedTrust couldn't say, we want to go be in Jacksonville, let's go open a shop. You couldn't do that. You had to be approved and vetted through county council and the fire chiefs and all of those things. And they had not gone through that process in 27 years.
Wow.
And so we found out that some dynamics in the market was creating the need for them to go through that process. And, on page 17B of the newspaper, they published, RFP, whatever. By the way, it's due on December the 26th, which was a Monday after Christmas. So we kind of had to decide, like, if we're doing the thing, like, we're all working over the holiday, and, we had to establish a new entity. We had to hire a medical director. We had to establish an initial staffing pattern. We had to create medical protocols, and we had to submit for state licensing and do a 100-page RFP response in 15 days. And we got it done and got it hand delivered on the 26th.
Wow.
And ended up in 2018 with the opportunity to go to Jacksonville. And it is still our largest metro that we serve. It's, there's more hospital beds in Metro Jacksonville than there is south of, our state capital in South Carolina. It's just an enormous amount of work, specifically in the area that we kind of thrive in. And so, but here we were again, we had grown so fast, we had to raise money to expand to Jacksonville because we were just blowing through the capital as we were, on kind of a hockey stick a little bit. And so we went back to some of our original investors, added a couple more, went through a full Reg D, securities offering, and it went well, and we opened in Jacksonville. So now we were one state shy. And we had through the end of December to get to Georgia, and added some things along the way in South Carolina and in Florida. But in December of 19, we opened our doors in Waycross, Georgia, with another hospital. So we kind of hit all the ticked and tied what we were trying to do from a budget perspective and plan perspective. And then at the very same time we were going into Georgia, we had an opportunity to acquire a company that we had worked very closely with. So our plan really at that time was, okay, open Georgia, purchase this company, and sit for like a year and not do anything. Let the AR cycle catch up, let the cash flow catch up, build a little war chest. And that was a great idea until 2020, right?
Oh, wow.
Right. So by the way, don't buy a company right before a pandemic. Not great timing. So entering into 2020, we were as strong as we had ever been. We were approached by others looking, acquisitive, interested in what we were doing. We thought now's not the time. We're on a roll. Hindsight, maybe we should have thought about that differently, but then, COVID comes.
You didn't see a global outbreak coming? You didn't catch wind of that?
Didn't see the black swan event. So, we had a lot to navigate through with COVID, like every business did, and certainly every healthcare business. But people thought, oh, well, you've got to be super busy. And it was the exact opposite. People didn't go to the hospital unless they were critical or they had COVID. And they didn't want to go to the hospital and potentially catch COVID. So, so our largest customers were hospitals. They represented about 97% of our business at the time. And they were down as much as 40%. And so, we took full advantage of every government program that was available, PPP and SBA EIDL and CARES Act funding and everything else. And our main goal was to protect the core from a client perspective and from a employee perspective, because a lot of people weren't. They were cutting back, or they were maybe deploying their folks to go do vaccines, and not vaccines initially, but testing initially, and later on vaccines. And we just never chased it. We said, nope, we're here about the hospitals. That's why we're here. We made the bet that would work out on the back end. And, I'd say probably, 20 to 22 was extremely flat, went from a rocket ship to almost down or leveling off, I guess you could say. And then late 22, everybody woke up at one time. All of our prior business development conversations that had literally paused for a year and a half, everybody started calling, okay, we got to get back to business. We like what you guys are doing. You stuck with the hospital, your partners. You didn't lose any partners. They're, still giving testimonials and kudos. And so really, I'd say early 23, late 22, we got back on the growth train and, experienced almost 30% growth in 2023. And in 2024, we'll probably be somewhere in the 20 to 25% growth range, which for our size is the bigger you get, those percentages are more meaningful. So
Yeah.
so now today, our latest thing is we added state number 4 and expanded into Asheville, North Carolina, about a month ago.
Cool.
And really, really excited about Western North Carolina. And, I'd say the real learning during COVID for us was we always thought that health systems were our thing, and that's a huge part of what we do. But what we really recognize is partnership is our thing. And it doesn't have to necessarily be a hospital. It could be a county 911 operation that is looking for a partner, not for somebody that wants to take it over, not for somebody whose goal is to, upend the county government, but somebody who says, hey, what are you trying to solve for?
Mm-hmm.
We can probably help you figure it out. So I know that's a very long-winded intro into what we're all about, but today we're around 500 employees. We have 14 base locations. Still a lot to learn, as always, but the message still works. Listen to your customers. Listen to your customers, take care of your people, take care of their people. You're good.
I love that. Yes, I've got several questions. That was phenomenal storytelling, by the way.
Awesome. Thank you.
Really, really fascinating. So I'm going to circle all the way back, not to like a specific point in what you said, but just a question that came up early on. You've mentioned before that you're not from the industry.
Right.
How did that help?
Oh, I had I've tried that before, or somebody I knew tried that before and it didn't work. Every good idea, even the surface good ideas, we would always ask the question, why wouldn't that work? How do you know that things haven't changed in the industry or things haven't changed in some other way that means we should take a look at it again? And especially when it came to building models that were different than kind of the traditional, what they call fee for service. You call me for a transport, I do the transport, I bill you. We thought that there were some other ways to come at it. And some of those things had been tried before, but maybe not quite as elegantly or the way that we did it. And I think that was a big piece. So knowing what you didn't know. The other was, taking the learning from my background and Lena's background and our other leaders' background outside of the industry and saying, hey, what might work in the defense industry or what might work in the airline industry or, something else like that. And what should we bring from that learning? Because most ambulance companies, there's 119 of them in South Carolina that are private. And most of them are owned or run by paramedics. No fault. There's some great companies and they're some of them are fantastic and they're clinically solid and all those things. But by nature of getting that paramedic certificate, a lot of them don't have other business experiences. And a lot of the gap or the, I guess blue ocean that we saw was really around that. It was like basic business blocking and tackling that the industry typically wasn't that good at. So that was for us, one of the advantages of saying, hey, I'm not in this box. Let's go build a better box.
Yeah. God, I'm resonating with that. We didn't even talk about this, but the business that I run, we do executive coaching and leader development and that kind of stuff for businesses. And in the last 2 years, we've had the honor of getting into a big ecosystem of a national fast food restaurant chain that you might get into heaven if you eat their food. Is kind of how you think about it without saying their name. And what was interesting is when it went from me giving a keynote to them nationally to them reaching out saying, hey, can you work with me as the operator of my team? And my thought was, I don't know anything about restaurants. Like, how am I going to help? And what I've heard in the last 2 years is they said, one of the reasons we brought you in is because you're not from the industry. We've already heard from everybody that has their way of thinking about restaurants and team and culture and whatever. But we like that you've been working across sectors in technology and marketing and real estate and all that stuff. And that was the first time I thought like, oh, of course it has its drawbacks, which is the humility you talked about of saying, yeah,
Right.
we had to be a learner. We had to apply ourselves, but it has that advantage of fresh thinking and new introduction of maybe obvious solutions that another industry or part of your experience and your background, you realize you're primed for. And
Right.
that can be a very empowering thing if someone's listening to this that is trying to enter an industry or start a business that has that insecurity of, but I didn't grow up in this. Maybe that's
Well, and I think, the learning for me, if I took a step back and knew even just a little bit of what I know now, 14, 15 years ago, the one of the misses was I would have probably aligned earlier with an industry person, right? Because you still have a lot of technical things, right? You have a lot of tactical
Totally.
things. And in our business, I don't know that there's an industry that is more regulated than we are, because we are at the intersection of healthcare, which obviously has DEA and Medicare and Medicaid and other regulatory agencies, and transportation. So DOT, DHEC, OSHA, all of those things. And so there is a lot of things that can kill you if you get them wrong. And I think there's enormous advantage in having smart people on your team that know that part of it. And I think as long as everybody's got a seat at the table and recognized for what they bring to the conversation, it doesn't have to be the same things. In fact, it shouldn't be the same things.
It's a really great point. Again, if you're strategizing right now, can you go find an industry expert or somebody that has at least inside information to keep you from tripping
Right.
over landmines that you might not see, having never been there before, right?
I'm writing a book right now called "Don't Step in My Pothole."
Let's go.
So that's yeah.
Okay.
So it's exactly about that.
Tell me a little bit about that.
It's really about the experience that I've had, and then also I've been in leadership groups for a long time with Vistage and things like that, and there's so many parts of a process as a company grows and even kind of goes from growth to that that elusive word of scale, that you can easily either get no advice or the wrong advice, and it just changes everything, And so the concept is a bunch of excerpts from 20 or 30 CEOs that I've gotten a chance to kind of homogenate with over the last 10 years. And, what's that particular area of your growth story that, either went really bad or went really good, but if you had stepped this direction, you'd have been in the pothole,
Yeah.
And we've certainly had some, whether it's business formation, things, or, again, regulatory things, or, I think some core decisions about, organizational structure. I think that the why behind what way you choose to go there is almost more important than which book you decide to model yourself off of.
Right.
And I've seen and felt, both really big wins in those areas, and then, a lot of wound licking in those areas too. So yeah, that's what the book is. I started it. It's an outline plus a little bit right now, but it's a good fun project, I guess,
Heck
to do
yeah.
on the side.
Well, when you're done and it's released, will you come back on here and let us talk with you about it?
I'd love to.
I'd love to promote it as well as just have a conversation about the insights in the book, because that sounds fascinating. It's very similar in a good way. It doesn't mean don't hear. There's already a book out there like this.
Sure.
There's a book called The Road Less Stupid, and I just
I
love that concept. I want to learn from as many people as possible. If I can, it's not always possible, but if I can avoid tripping over the same thing you tripped over, that would be nice. So
that would be helpful.
I would love to have you back on and talk through that book. That would be awesome.
Perfect.
Another question is just, there's been several periods in every business, but we got to hear your story. So in your business, where you were facing some incredible uncertainty, how did you handle the uncertainty? It's a very uncomfortable and confusing time.
So to your point, I mean, there's been several, between a co-founder passing away to bring on someone that is smarter than you. At least that's your assessment from the beginning. And my partner, she was, went to Brown undergrad, London School of Economics, Emory Law School, had worked in public companies, general counsel, chief strategy officer, all of those things, which was intimidating, but also for me, super fascinating because there were so many things that I was so interested in, but had never really found an expert to, not only talk about it with, but actually go through it with. And so I think when you're faced with those huge times of uncertainty, like, first of all, you got to have a really thick skin as an entrepreneur. And you also have to be humble and realize that there are people and things and situations that are, like the Tesla song, they're signs, and you just got to pay attention to them and take advantage of what they're trying to learn. One of my favorite stories, have you ever heard the phrase, be the buffalo? You ever heard that story?
I don't know. I don't think so.
All right. So a buffalo is very different from cows, specifically if there's a big storm. So most herd animals during a storm, they come together in a clump and they walk away from the storm, right? And invariably they get soaked and they're in the storm together, but they're in the storm. A buffalo, maybe not the only animal, but a specific animal that will walk by itself through the storm. And when it walks through the storm, the consequence is it's actually through the bad times faster, because it was, walking opposite. Whereas the cows that are walking with the storm, they're just getting rained on for 6 hours, So,
yeah.
So for me, a lot of it was just being dogged. And if you don't have the option to fail, that's a real convenient way to not fail. And that's certainly where many entrepreneurs are. That's where I was. 100% of my future for my family and everything is in the success of this business. And while I think things like side hustles and side businesses and being really diluted and doing different things, there can be value there. I also think there's a completely different opportunity to maximize because of your focus.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm really interested in a bunch of different things. I'm like a squirrel that is always interested. But when you're faced with a kill you moment in your business, that's not the time that you want to have your eggs in 6 different baskets, So a lot of it was just not being willing to accept that something was going to kill you, or something was going to hurt you, or somebody was smarter than you, or whatever. And really what I've found is being smart in most businesses is about putting the time in to become an expert. I'm not from EMS, even 12 years, 13 years later. I guess I maybe can't say it quite the same way, but I chair a finance and reimbursement committee for our state ambulance association. I've never taken care of a patient. I've never myself billed a patient claim, but I understand because I had to learn how revenue cycle works in our business, or the company wouldn't survive.
Right.
So I think realizing that those trials are also the things that become your foundation, to do different things and more things. But yeah, I don't think you hit a point in the business where you're not faced with those times.
Yeah.
And the bigger you get, the harder it is to solve for. I think the bigger a company gets, the time horizon and complexity is infinitely more. And, if you've got 10 employees and you run on a hard time and you have, say you're not going to make payroll on Friday because of something, you can solve that problem a lot different with 10 employees.
Right.
Right. You can take a personal loan. You can do different things, borrow from mom or dad or brother or whatever. But when you have $1 million payroll, you can't do that. And so it's almost forces a lot of growth and development. And you still don't get it right because there's so many unknowns in every business. Healthcare is really tricky in that all of our costs have gone up 30 to 40% in the last 5 years. but revenue hasn't, right? Because we're kind of tied to Medicare. Scale is really, really, really important in our industry now. And it's definitely something that we think is, from an industry perspective, we think there's a lot of fragmentation that's going to change. And we're not alone. We're not the only industry dealing with that.
So costs have gone up, but what you're able to market your services for is kind of tied to something that hasn't or can't go up. Yeah. And it's chewed into your profits. So correct. Right now, the only way is just more customers, scale?
Yeah, scale and efficiency. We're a logistics business with precious cargo. So in a lot of ways, the more you're able to saturate a given market, the more efficient you can be. And so that's part of the story. The other part of the story is honestly just further development of those different layers of your company so that they can do more. Like the person that runs our billing and revenue cycle she's a savant. And the bigger we get, the better she gets. And, the better she is at helping us be more effective and efficient in the dollars that we collect. Because at the end of the day, patients aren't really who's paying for most of our services. It's an insurance policy, right? And that means there's a lot of process to deal with denials and deal with, all of the things that healthcare payers throw up in front of before they send you the money for the work that you did. So, but at the end of the day, I think that's the learning. When you come to these hard places, just realizing that there's no option. We've got to figure it out. So once you take that off the table, the creative juices get flowing and you turn to the people that you built the thing with to begin with and say, hey, what would you do? Like, hey, you got, either we figure this out or nobody has a job in 6 months. So how about we figure it out,
I love it. Yeah, it's almost like the quicker you can come to accept the situation you're in, the quicker you can move on to find a solution for the situation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because there's so many things that happen to you that are not predictable or they're not necessarily in your control. Step one, you only get better at predicting those things, right? But they're still going to happen. And so how do you build a resilient company with resilient people that can band together when things like that happen and have a history of winning together when it's hard? Winning when it's easy, like from mid 17 to mid 18, we won pretty much everything we went after. And I'd say we learned a lot during the time, but nowhere near as much as we did when that stopped. You said, okay, how do we get smart again? How do we be different again? How do we have that, I don't want to call it lack of confidence, but when you don't believe that everything you touch is going to turn positive, how do you deal with that?
Yeah.
And I think every business, once it's been around for a little while, has periods of both, hopefully.
So how do you take steps to build a culture that is more resilient like that?
Number one thing is transparency. Number one, you have to say, this is what we're facing. This is what we're up against. Because in that time, it'll be super stressful. It's kind of like a sprint versus a marathon at that point. You're putting out a fire. But if you've been really transparent with the magnitude of what you were up against and you then win, you get this organizational confidence that maybe didn't exist before. Like the things that we're doing today are big things, right? They're big as a percentage of revenue. They're big as a percentage of like the bandwidth required to do them, but they're not so much bigger than things that we've done before. So now you take that intimidation off the plate, and now you can say, okay, yeah, maybe we hadn't done this exactly, but we've done these other 4 things that were also hard, and we pulled it off. Or we got through COVID.
Yeah.
We got through COVID when we had 15% of our workforce, out sick, or got through COVID when our biggest clients lost 40% of their market and we had to survive. So if you can survive that, then it kind of says, okay, well, it's bad and it's difficult and all those things, but we can also probably get through it.
I love that. Yeah, man, it reminds me of the David and Goliath story where
Right.
he's sitting up against a challenge, that he'd never been up before. And he went to his mental reserves and said, I haven't killed a giant, but I have killed a bear.
Right.
And I do remember when I killed a lion that one time, and
Right.
it was enough to like, you know what? I bet I could apply that here as well.
Right. Well, and if nothing else, I mean, there's going to be times where we do all the right things and still lose. Right. I mean, we tell people that we're competing with, hey, this is good competition and we might not always win, but we're going to do it the right way. And we don't like it. We're super competitive. We want to win. But, I think if you can have confidence in doing things when they're really overwhelming and hard to begin with, then certainly it changes your outlook when that next opportunity comes up, or hopefully keeps you from becoming complacent again in the future if you're on a winning streak, because it can come and it can go.
Yeah. Oh man,
Sure.
the hard times when I've gone through them personally and or in the business, one of the things that's helped me kind of endure is I kept telling myself I'm training at altitude right now.
Right. That's
And
it.
I don't know if you've ever run at altitude. I spent a summer in Colorado, and the
Okay.
first run I went on, I was like barely could make a mile because the altitude was, so hard to get enough oxygen. But what was
Right.
crazy is after just 3 months of living in Colorado, when I came back down to sea level in Georgia, I was running twice the distance with ease.
Right.
And I
Right.
started thinking when I was going through a hard time, like, hey man, you're training at altitude right now. Like when this
Right.
passes, it is going to be incredible. The momentum and even the ease at which what used to feel hard now feels easy in comparison. Does
Right.
that make sense?
No, absolutely. I mean, we joke all the time that we're building a plane while we're flying it and occasionally trying to thread a needle at the same time. And, there have been a handful of times in the company's history where it didn't feel like that, because things were fairly solid. Nothing was too crazy. And, you almost get to the end of a project like that and you're like, that's it. Like, wow, that was easy, because every other time I'm trying to do it with not enough resources and not enough time and not enough money and not enough of anything. And we somehow pulled it off. So all of a sudden, if you have one or two of those resources, you don't even have to have all of them. You have one or two of those things and you're like, oh, that's not that it's easy, because that's not the right word, but, you're like, I can knock this out of the park. I can crush
Yes.
this,
Yes.
which is a fun place to be occasionally.
That's awesome. When you look internally, we've talked a lot about external challenges and all that stuff, but I know internally facing, it is a world of difference. The challenges you face, like you said, leading 10 people versus 500
Right.
people or whatever the number is now at the internal count.
Right.
What are you solving for now as you look internally at the business?
So I'd say the first big solve started in 21, and it's when I made the decision, along with my partner, to transition out of the CEO role. And so I was the CEO until June of 2021, and then moved into the founder role, whatever the heck that means. It's not flip flops every day, and trading in loafers for flip flops. But during COVID, we recognized that the technical expertise that she had was required
Yep.
at that time in our business. And we had really grown the business in a scrum. It was all hands on deck. Let's come together. We'll all work it out together, and kind of a two-headed CEO monster, if you will. And we realized that was very confusing and disruptive to the team,
Sure.
because Lena and I have a lot of similarities on things that matter. But there are a couple of things that were very different. I'm very relational. She's very legal, compliance, all of those things. And so internally now, I'd say the biggest focus is on equipping the people that are closest to the largest number of our employees. So our local leadership that has a span of control of 20 to 35 people in a market. they really make or break the business. And, I can be really good at selling or really good at government relations or whatever. But if the crew that shows up is different than what I sold, then I'm nothing but another sales guy, another, liar. And so we have realized the challenge with taking a paramedic off the back of an ambulance and putting them into a leadership role is they have had to be very alpha in a lot of their day to day, control the scene, take control, make the family comfortable that you're confident, all those things. What they haven't always had to do is take a step back and, what is this like for you? Or why is this not going well? The relational human side. And so that's why our
You're
big
right.
focus really is we're people taking care of people. So if we want our people to take care of the people that are our customers and clients and patients, then we have to take care of them. And what does that look like? And it's evolving. I mean, some of it's getting the right people on the bus and the right seats, but a lot of it is in recognizing as a leader that your people shouldn't have to ask for the life vest if you know they're drowning. Sometimes there's that view that, well, if you're, competent at your job and you need help, raise your hand. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. Bullshit. Like, can you see them drowning? Well, yeah, they're drowning, but they
Yeah.
didn't come to me yet. I'm like, shame on you,
Yeah.
so I think that's a big focus that we've, formally dealt with over the last 2 years, with bringing in outside folks to lead leadership sessions over a period of time. But a lot of it's just informally. So we've put a lot of focus on recognizing, little things and big things and recognizing them internally, but also sharing them externally to the world. And the strange impact of that makes perfect sense, but it wasn't why we did it, was probably 6 to 8% of the folks that apply to our jobs now say that recognition is why they applied. They say the fact that you're sending out kudos and shout outs about your field level providers and the impact that they make, that's a differentiator,
Yeah.
And so for me, like, that's the why, right? Like, why are you doing this? When somebody sends you a letter and says, hey, my father was in cardiac arrest and you were there and you saved his life. I mean, that stuff is crazy emotional and all those things, but we're just as impacted and our providers are just as impacted, by the person that says, hey, I was really scared. I was in the back of the ambulance, wasn't all that sick, but I was scared and you held my hand,
Wow.
And so for me, our role essentially is overhead, but our role is to support the people doing the work, and that's hard internally for, I guess, some people from the old school, I guess, that are hey, I'm a manager now, or I'm a boss now, and that means I tell you what to do. And I'm like, I don't want to overuse the servant leadership cliche, but at the end of the day, we could all disappear, but they're the ones that are the tip of the spear. And so if we
Yeah.
don't act like that and they don't feel that, somebody else will either do it or they'll at least lie to them and tell them they'll do it. So that's, he who has the staff wins in our business, because it's a very tight labor market. So, that's why when you mentioned some of the things that I work on, culture and workforce are two areas that I think makes us different.
Yes. Oh, it's so beautiful. Like you've obviously got the value system already in place to naturally care for people and to see why that would matter at a human level, but you're also seeing at the strategic level why caring for people helps everybody, right? It helps.
Right.
It helps not just
Right.
our people stay around and therefore lower retention and increase engagement, but it trickles all the way down to the customer who needs it the most, to where they're
Right.
getting cared for and they're having a phenomenal experience, and then it feeds itself. And man, I mean,
Right.
it's been my experience with the amount of businesses I've worked in. It's definitely increased since 2020 for sure, but there's just a whole lot of silent suffering
Right.
going around in people's lives, and you usually don't find
Well,
out about it.
there is in our business. Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say our business is one that on some level, people have to compartmentalize with
Yeah.
what we do, right? They see terrible things on a daily basis. Um, but between what they're seeing and the amount of hours that first responders, put in, none of these guys work 40 hours. None of them.
Yeah.
None, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that. That's a whole other session. But, when folks are putting in 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 hours a week consistently, naturally obviously there's no such thing as work-life balance. So their relationships are going to suffer. All those things are going to suffer. And we can't be, in my opinion, another thing standing in the way of them trying to decompress or trying to, put it out there that they need some help, or, hey, I had a really rough shift. Can I just chill here at the office for 2 hours before I drive home? And the old school way would have said, suck it up,
Right.
buttercup. That's what it would have said. And, we unfortunately, at our size, we've experienced loss, at the employee level. We've had folks that have taken their own lives or attempted to take their own lives, and that is not that anybody really fully understands the why behind those things, but I know that we should try not to be a contributor towards people that are struggling or reaching out or looking for something. But again, that's the human aspect. I mean, I tell all of our managers and leaders, I should not personally know your direct report better than you do. And I'm going to talk to them and I'm going to get to know them. So if I know them better than you do, then you're not doing your job.
Yeah.
Because how can you support them, right? So.
It's so beautiful. And I do get it, man. I've experienced my own version of stress and overwhelm building to create really nervous system dysregulation, where you're kind of constantly in a fight or flight anxiety place. And I understand why someone could feel trapped and hopeless and like this is never going to change, And so everything you're talking about, having people you can reach out to, having someone help you understand what's going on and get you back to a stable place is a lifeline for so many people, but especially the industry you're in, the things they're having to interact with on a daily basis, and the person they're having to be for somebody else in their worst moments makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, I think that's the part I underestimated.
Sure.
It was cool in 2010 to say, hey, it's, ambulances and lights and sirens and radios and we get to save lives and take care of people. I mean, all of that was the shiny stuff. Looking back on it, like we did a graphic for a marketing thing. Conceptually, it was the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon. And it was saying, we talk about how many transports we do in some given period, or, what your revenue is, or whatever KPI you want to use. But if you really think about the work that we're doing externally, every person we transported is connected to how many people? I mean, my gosh, their family, their friends, etc. Every patient had a doctor and or a nurse or multiple that are also worried about, their outcome. But internally, the coolest one for me is there's 500 people that made a decision that we're their livelihood. And that is a lot of responsibility. And, we want people to be proud of, where they're working and the shirt they're working and the uniform beside the person that's wearing it beside them. And, it's an evolutionary, never stopping process. But it's one that I think is the easiest or the hardest to beat and the easiest to defend if you can figure out that cultural piece at a big level. But for us, our biggest challenge is that we're doing it in 14 different places. And naturally, you've got regional things and people things that make it hard. And you don't want to prescribe some, completely standardized thing, because then you take the power out of your local teams to build their family, build their home, if you will. But I do think it's what matters. Ultimately, we can do math as good or better than anybody. We can buy all the shiny trucks and, all the equipment. We can win business. But truly, the people on the trucks, the tip of the spear, and the people that answer the phone and talk to that, distraught, caller, those are the ones that do the work that not only drives the business, from a revenue perspective, but that really impacts people in a different way. And they need support and they need help, because the people calling them, I tell people all the time, they're calling you not because they want you to say no. They're calling you because
Yeah.
they need help. And they had a lot of different choices of what numbers to dial, and they dialed ours. So take that seriously.
So good. Josh, this is I think a perfect place for us to end, because it so encapsulates the heart of your business, the heart of who you are. And I honestly think the reason why you all have succeeded to the point that you have is, like you just said, beyond the technical expertise, beyond the X's and O's, there's a beating heart at the center, and there's people trying to care better for other people. And I think that wins in the end. And so thank you for being on here and sharing your story and sharing your heart. And please come back when this book is finished.
I sure will. Thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed it.
Yes, sir. It's been a pleasure.
Founders, thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and hop into our monthly founder email so we can ensure you stay on the edge of peak performance and massive business results.